Next is network zones. The zones is an important feature in our networks, in our network segmentation, along with the hosts and groups. So we'll talk about the network zones. Now, what exactly is a zone? So any group of devices that you want to follow the same default rules and policies will form a zone in CE. Now, when I say default rules and policies, I want to segment my network where I want to block any incoming traffic. I want to pass all the outgoing traffic, and all the interzones traffic also I want to block. It is a very segregated zone. So that's where you can create it. If there are a group of devices that would be following that policy, we recommend that you create a zone for it. And then as and when your devices come, so you attach an interface to a zone. So the next one is that only creating a zone in CE will not apply any rules and policies. As we said, we have only created a framework for it. Now we need to tell CE what all networks should this zone apply on. So for that, we need to have an interface associated with it. So here we have, so a zone should always have an interface associated with it before using it in policies. Now, this is a very important point. If no interface is configured with the zone, any rules or policies using that zone will not have any effect. So if you see issues that I have added a rule, but it's not working, the first thing is to go and check if that zone has an interface associated with it. So Crystalline by default comes with 4 zones, and we believe that these 4 zones are sufficient to have your networks working. So the first zone is the WAN zone. WAN zone is an external facing zone. Any external traffic, any untrusted traffic that is there comes via the zone. WAN always has the default NAT enabled. So CE, for any traffic that goes out of CE, gets NATed with the WAN IP. Traffic from LAN, DMZ, and hotline are permitted by default. That is obvious because if you want to access anything outside your CE, you need the allowed rule. And then incoming traffic is blocked by default. So we don't want an open door policy to CE. So we have blocked the incoming traffic. There are just a few rules which are necessary for operations, and we'll talk about them later. Then the second zone that we have is the LAN zone. LAN is a trusted internal network. So most of the time, all your staff network can be on the LAN zone. The traffic from LAN zone is allowed. So any traffic between 2 LAN zones. So I create one interface in LAN zone and the second interface also in the LAN zone. So traffic between those two will be allowed by default. For access from external zone, application rules should be used. So if you want to access from external sources or devices, we either need port forwarding rules or we need one-to-one NAT rules, and we'll talk about them in advanced firewalls. Our third zone, default zone, is the demilitarized zone. Now, this is mostly used for hosting external servers. We recommend that this zone is a separate zone than LAN zone because this has a high probability of getting attacked. So as long as this zone is separate from your LAN zone, LAN is secured. And so by default, there is no traffic allowed to this zone. And we can use traffic rules for allowing or blocking. So by default, it's blocked. So allowing traffic between different zones and DMZ. The fourth zone that comes up is the hotline zone. This is the guest network. So any untrusted guest that you want to give access to your network, you have the hotline zone there. Traffic from LAN to hotline is permitted, but from the LAN, from hotline, it cannot access any other traffic except for the external zone. Now, apart from these 4 zones, if you feel that you are not able to cover your requirements, require more stringent rules, then we also have the option of creating custom zones. So in these custom zones, you can define your own allow and block policies. But as I mentioned earlier, a zone should always have an interface associated with it. And if no interface is configured, the rules will not allow with the zones. In our lab, let's create a new zone and let's see what I'm really talking about access policies. So to create a new zone, you go to Security Configurations, Advanced Firewall. And these are the default zones that I was talking about. You have LAN, WAN, DMZ, hotline. This shows what are the allowed zones to this zone. So LAN only has traffic coming from LAN. WAN has from DMZ, hotline, LAN. DMZ does not have any allowed zones in it. Hotline, only the traffic from LAN is permitted. The default policy for all of these zones is blocked. So any device not falling in these zones, the traffic would be blocked. And currently I have two networks here. One falls in the WAN zone, the other falls in the LAN zone. Now let's create a custom zone here. Okay, so I'll be creating a test zone. Now, before coming to the zone policy, let's see what the default policies are. So here the default incoming policy is telling allow, which means all the traffic to this zone should be allowed. Default outgoing is allow and interzone is block. Now let's be a bit strict here, and let's say that I want the default to be block. Outgoing should be allowed because if I want to access anything to the external network, I should be having that. And interzone traffic, I'm saying that let's allow all this here. Let's allow all the interzone traffic and default incoming traffic. I have done it as, let's do this as well, allow. Now, what does the allowed zones and blocked zones do here then? Since my default interzone traffic is allow, if I want to block any particular zone, I should add them here. So my default interzone is, so any traffic from WAN, DMZ, LAN, and hotline will be allowed to test zone. Now I want to limit the traffic from hotline to this. I want to limit the traffic from DMZ to this. So now I have kept the interzone policy as allow, but I have blocked these two zones. When should we use the allowed zone? Suppose I keep my interzone policy as blocked. So now, since my interzone is blocked, now I want to selectively allow different zones here. So now I'll say, okay, traffic only from LAN should be allowed to my zone. So this is how you create your zone, and this is how you create your policies to this zone. So I'll do this here and remove this. And okay, so NAT, what does this stand for is, so any traffic that exits from this zone, whether we should NAT it or we shouldn't. So mostly for external facing zones, we check this button. But if it is not an external facing zone and you don't need the traffic to be NATed, we can leave it unchecked. And now we add a zone. Now, if you see test zone, but there is no network attached here. So the zone is present, but there is nothing in this zone right now. So any traffic rules or policies that we use with this will not have any effect. We'll soon add the network in this as well. Now, we usually have a question like, when should we use zones and when should we use groups? As you saw, zone defines the policies more in general. So, and you need an interface in that zone. Otherwise, so I cannot have a local zone, but have a policy for a remote site. That would not work. So you should use a zone when you want to have a different default access policy and a different interzone policy that is local to your CE. It is not for remote. Now, when should we use groups? When we are grouping a number of devices, when we are grouping a number of networks. So like the groups that we created a LAN and VLAN network that was for my local CE. We created a remote and IPsec network that was for my POC. And we created all of them as part of my test network that stands for my complete organization. So that's where you use groups and that's where you use zones. So these should not be interchanged. And as I said, the zone has a limitation that an interface should be part of that zone.